Can I just get 30 seconds?
Yeah, it's okay. It still can see you.
Bruh.
Bro, can you hear me through the volume?
Yep.
POS verbally, take 1 and 3. Transactionality is not something to be feared. It is something that is fair and something that provides an inherent benefit to all the individuals that do opt in from it, right? We don't think transactionality is something that is necessarily horrible and is something that is manipulative towards the individual. In fact, we think it is counter opposite. In fact, we think it allows for more people to get more access to fairness, to get more access to things like preventing themselves from being manipulated. A few pieces of setup before we continue there. Firstly, about how it manifests on our side and how this non-stigmatization of transactionality looks like. Firstly, we think that it looks like when you give a gift, right, you'll expect something back from that individual, right? The problem is it doesn't always have to be financial, right? So long as it's something that equates to emotionally or something that equates to the same value, right? For example, your boyfriend paying for your food, right? You necessarily have things like spending more time with them, handcrafting like a card for that individual, right? And we think that this will probably look like things that you're comfortable with, right? So that's to say that if you don't want to do it, you're likely not going to do it in the first place, right? You won't feel pressured because we think there's so many different ways and methods in which, in an equal proportion to what you can produce back to that individual, it doesn't necessarily have to be like bad things or malicious things, right? Now let's move on to the second point setup. What happens when there's no stigma, right? We think then how this manifests is that everyone knows about it. It's a daily norm in society. It's a cultural norm. Like everyone lives their lives with this expectation that if they do something good, they're gonna get something in return, right? So like this looks like your friends and family doing it, right? Media promotes it in a very healthy way. So like your media tells you that, oh, if your friend pays you $100 to pay for your food, you should probably do something back, right? It doesn't have to be $100 food, like paying him back. You can like bring him around in your car or like drive him around as like some sort of like way, the means for that, right? What is our pathway to victory? We think it's two things. Firstly, we get healthier norms in relationships or friendships and relationships in general, right? Secondly, how about how we get more communication? Lastly, how we prevent a larger scale of harm, right? Now moving on to our substantives then. Firstly, we tell you a few things then. Firstly, about one-sided relationships and how they're incredibly damaging, right? We think that when you stigmatize transactionality, the comparative is an imbalance between a person that gives a lot and a person that doesn't really reciprocate it back, right? Because it's necessarily viewed as a stigma within society, right? We think there's a few things under this. Firstly, it looks like people wanting to do it out of their own goodwill. So your girlfriend canceling plans for you. But there's another bigger problem in which toxic individuals can manipulate this stigma of transactionality and use it against you. That is the point where you do not really have a mechanism to fight back against this, right? Two things there. Firstly, we think that it looks like, for example, a girlfriend wanting to cancel her plans for her boyfriend, but her boyfriend doesn't reciprocate and do the same thing for that, and vice versa, right? We think that the boyfriend may not intentionally mean it, but because of the stigma behind transactionality, it's really difficult for them to communicate the difference between these. Now let's move on to the crux then, talk about toxic individuals and how it's likely going to be incredibly harmful, right? We think to that extent, you cannot escape because you're really unaware of the issues that do manifest from this, right? Because you're incredibly vulnerable. Toxic individuals who do want to like abuse you or who manipulate you for some sort of benefit or some sort of means to an end will likely use this as an excuse. For example, if you're a friend, right, they ask you to pay for their food constantly, but when you do ask them to pay it back, they just say that, oh, you only value a friendship based on transactionality, right? I think that this is the biggest case scenario, especially in relationships and friendships. There are generally a lot of individuals who exist and use these types of means in order to get their way. That's the unfortunate reality. And there isn't really much fallback mechanism because it's really hard to explain to your friend why you expect your friend to suddenly pay you back for food because it's a stigma in society. And you can't really bring it up because you look like a worse off person because you're expecting something from a friend, right? That's the problem with society. There's no way for you to actually break out of this toxic cycle. So two harms under this, right? We think that firstly, you're gonna get really big building resentment, right? Secondly, but even if you do it out of the goodness of your own heart, it's still really horrible. Firstly, let's talk about resentment, right? Even if you do so much and compensate so much for your friend, like buying the food or doing like a lot of things, right? You do not feel compensated because they don't reciprocate any of it back because of transactionality. We think humans in general are biologically built in to want fairness. There are things that are inherently within your life that you want. You're taught that if you if you pay for a service, you should get a service back. If you pay money for food, you're going to get food. Fairness is something that everyone wants, and so everyone wants to be appreciated and be treated the way that they want. So that's to say that even if you don't expect something from a person, we think it still mentally drains you insofar as you're committing a lot of your emotional and mental energy towards that person. Even if it's not financial, we think emotional energy and mental drain is still incredibly significant. If you spend a lot of time with them, but they don't reciprocate, if you make plans constantly with your friends, and it's always you making the first move to make the plans and never reciprocated back, you feel emotionally drained, you feel unfulfilled, and you feel like you're the only one in a relationship that actually does care within friendships, right? The harm, three major impacts of this, right? This harms perception on friends and relationships, right? Because when you do have entered these friendships that are incredibly manipulative and you do get out on the best case scenario, you're likely fearful of future ones because there's a stigma on transactionality and you're scared that the same process might happen again and you cannot get out or you cannot advocate for help, right? Secondly, it's unrealistic expectations, right? When you're a recipient of unrequited love, for example, you're not giving it back because of transactionality, you're likely when you move into different relationships or you've broken up with your previous girlfriend or boyfriend, you move into different relationships, you expect the same level of treatment, and when that doesn't happen, you equate to that new relationship that you're not enough, right? And I think that's the major problem with this society. And last but not least, even if you realize you're being manipulated, or even if you don't, it's really bad because the narrative makes it infinitely times more harder for you to actually break out of that cycle because it's so hard for people to opt out because society views transactionality and wanting fairness as something that's incredibly horrible. Is there a point?
The entire assumption on your case is that people can only find happiness from others. Don't you think that in a world where people can find happiness from themselves and their own actions, that's one that's more sustainable and much more easy to take happiness on outside?
I think even if that's the case, you can't live in isolation. You still have things like friends, you still have things like family, right? You still care about others' opinions, right? Even if you can find happiness from isolation, that doesn't mean you're going to cut yourself off from your family. You're still going to want a level of appreciation for your work, right? I think that's just something that people want. It's fairness, it's simple. Moving on to the second piece of substantive, which is communication, how we get better forms of it, right? When you know there's an active precedent of transactionality, you then feel incredibly safer, right? It's easier to progress in relationships and friendships because you know that if you do more, you're going to receive more, right? I think this just generally leads to better fulfillment because it sets a precedent. If I'm bringing my friend out to dinner constantly and he does the same for me, and it's generally a way healthier friendship because if he doesn't do the same for you, you have a justification to break it off, right? Because it's just not healthy to maintain this. The comparative on their side is people not reciprocating, right? If you do a lot of good things, you feel scared to continue to do more if they do not reciprocate because you feel like you're some weird stalker or like you're the only one committing in that relationship. You feel weird and you're less incentivized to do more. So you're likely going to pull away in a lot of these cases, right? So you won't do more action. So impacts are simple, right? We think generally on our side, it's much easier to achieve a level of fulfillment because there's more predictability in the things that you do. You know that if you do X, Y, Z good things, your friend is going to reciprocate that back in some sort of emotional value. It doesn't have to be financial. It doesn't have to be something that's bad or malicious, right? You just expect them to put the same level of commitment and effort into proportional to what the things that you do, right? So you spend time with your friends, you expect them to spend time with you. You buy them food, you expect them to do the same for you. That is the world we sign on the opening. This is a world of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if I speak as well.
Yep.
If I keep on giving gifts to one person, at some point I'm going to wonder why nothing is changing. I keep on buying and buying or spending time with that person, cancelling my own plans, and that person does nothing to return it. The person on the other hand views me differently. She thinks, oh, he keeps on buying me gifts, I'm continuing to expect more gifts from this person. So one day when I stop buying her gifts to find out what happened, she thinks I become upset with her, and I think she has never been able to reciprocate the affection towards me. It ends up becoming a really messy situation because of the existence of this stigmatization. I don't think we can stand for it. We make things much simpler. Few points of rebuttal to the case from competition. On the idea that it has to be equal, if you buy 100 steak, you have to get back 100 steak. I think firstly this doesn't deal with what Joshua said either, right? Even if that is true, what's wrong with fair compensation? Like we enshrine fair compensation anywhere else in a business deal. Fair compensation towards minorities for the effort they do. Fair compensation between men and women in a job. I don't understand why we cannot get fair compensation within this world either, or within this form of relationship either, given that it's two individuals who have the same parameters of an individual, right? And so they have to continue dealing with that later on. But also, people are reasonably able to assess the capacity of their friends and their partners, right? If I'm rich and Joshua is poor, I won't be expecting a 100 ringgit steak. Even a 10 ringgit flower already means a lot to me, right? Because I know in proportion to what he earns, or in proportion from where he came from, it's already an act of kindness towards me, or showing of reciprocation towards the gift that I got for him. And I think that already fulfills me, because I don't think people have unreasonable expectations. That's a whole other problem that you cannot solve on your side of the house as well. But also, why does it have to be those materialistic gifts anyway? There are 5 love languages that I'm sure all of us know about. I don't understand why you cannot increase your giving of another love language. If my love language is buying gifts, and Joshua's love language is physical touch, for example, you can just increase the physical touch, and whenever I increase the buying of gifts, for example, right? So I don't think their parents can stand in this debate anymore. I think they have to contend with the fact that it happens on a multitude of bases. You cannot argue for the simplistic model that you run. So then, why is the stigmatization of transactionality manifesting in harmful ways on the side of our position? I think firstly, there are clear markers on our side now when you should back away from toxic relationships. When the removal of the stigma happens, you understand that it should be one-to-one or in proportion of what you give, right? So whenever it is not one-to-one or not in proportion of what you give, there's a clear time for you to reassess relationship and see if you're accurately being compensated, or if you're accurately being fulfilled, or if you're just there because you're just there within the relationship, or this person is doing something to get money out of you or to get your time out of you, right? Opposition says it can be used to expect friends to give things for you. But I want to flip this, right? I think it's a good opportunity for you to assess the reasons of your friendship and the necessities you operate, or the benefits you gain from it, right? Human beings are human beings. We all have our emotional needs that we need for functioning within society. I don't think we should make exceptions for friends because they are a different level of society or a different thing within society, right? Furthermore, to add on to this, I think media portrayals of the stigmatization of transactional relationships also manifest in harmful ways. If any of you have watched In the Summer I Turned Pretty recently, the main character had the choice to choose between a boy who did nothing for her and cheated on her, and a boy who lost his internship for her. Because of the way the stigmatization happened, it is viewed as a reasonable choice to make the choice for the boy, and a reasonable choice to lose your job for someone else, even if you didn't get any reciprocation for those things. I think it is a harmful standard that you're putting onto individuals, and I'll later on prove why that fuels harmful toxic masculinity narratives or harmful echo chambers for people to fall into. But also, I think it becomes also, the impact of this is that you get better quality friendships, they improve your perception of friends, and everyone you engage into relationships in the future has a better idea of what to expect out of relationships. The predictability that we offer is something they cannot get on their side of the house. Second contribution to that, I think it becomes much easier to start friendships and relationships on our side of the house. This has to happen at the backdrop of the male loneliness epidemic, or the issues with males falling into toxic masculinity traps and not being able to socialize, not being able to engage with others, or the simple insult, right? Which then drives them into bad roads. On our side, where there's a culture of reciprocating it, because it is far simpler, now when you engage with friends, you're getting back things out of them, so friendships become much more clearer and becomes much more fulfilling for you as well. You're not relying on one individual in the friend group who's sponsoring everyone. You're better able to assess what each individual within the friend group needs to offer. Secondly, why does it become far easier to maintain these friendships? One, because it becomes a convo starter, right? You did something for me, I'll continue to belanja you teh tarik next time, or give you another gift next time. Let's meet over this. This naturally leads to the beginning of newer friendships or newer forms of relationships that reduces the barrier of entry. On their side, when they stigmatize that form of transactionality, the way you view it itself is something that is harmful. You don't want to give back because you're seen as just paying back the person for what they're doing. On our side, we think it's completely justified to either pay back in whatever way you can pay back and engage further in discussions because of that. You get better expectations, better fulfillments out of the things. There are clear expectations, right? I think the impacts of this are then clear. Again, you get better quality friendships. But secondly, it will help you solve the male loneliness epidemic for poorer men as well. There's a large toxic masculine culture that says men should be providers and men should serve a submissive wife. You should do everything for that wife. They shouldn't expect anything back, just give everything to them. I think this is extremely harmful for poorer men and minorities in society, and it also puts a harmful expectation onto individuals in society on what they should get out of other individuals, People end up glorifying the idea of this no transaction relationship, where they're just a sugar baby and they get everything out of it. They end up searching for these things in their daily life. They end up searching for these types of friendships in their daily life, which severely stunt their growth and other things, and they're constantly unfulfilled because they're fed narratives that encourage them to do these things. Before I move on, I'll take a few. Right?
So if you take that you're like voluntary, you know that person is voluntarily doing something, so the level of appreciation is higher instead of being like
because there is a stigma towards the transactionality of it, there is simply no alternative. They're not volunteering to give you gifts. That is the only way you're operating within society, which is giving gifts to individuals. On outside of the house, you know that there is a multitude of things you can do, and that there is an expectation to provide on the other end. On your side of the house, it becomes the default to just give and give and give, and one partner within the relationship, or one individual within the relationship, has the power to just continue giving and giving and giving, even though no one agreed to those terms within those things, or one other partner might expect something different, right? For the individual that is continuing to give, they may not necessarily have wanted to be in that position, but because there was no other position for them to be in society, they are forced into a cycle where they have to just give to the other individual if they want to reap the benefits from the other individual, or if they want to engage in a relationship as a whole. I think on scale, our side is far better, right? Because when transactional relationships are perpetuated and are the norm within society, you're far more able to engage in multiple relationships, because you don't have to put all your resources towards one individual or one type of relationship or one type of friend group. You're better able to get benefits out of many types of friend groups. So the way in which you engage relationships and the way in which you seek friendships is also far healthier on our side of the house. You're better able to get the expectation and the predictability out of it, which encourages you to seek those things or maintain friendships that you had in school, because you know they're going to give you back certain things as well for what you give to them. It becomes far easier, and the barrier to entry to approach the individual also becomes far less. You just buy a coffee for an individual, you immediately know you have a follow-up, and that predictability within your relationship is far healthier for you. And for all those reasons, I think you should side with proposition.
The world that OG envisions is one where the moment I see the young debaters that I'm training fail in NRIBC, I should just cut them out of the club and I should just not even do any coaching at all, right? Because they assume that transactionality in deep personal relationships is one where it's quite easy for us to agree on what is considered proportionate. Notice how both speakers, TM and DPM, asserts that the reason why people will know that this transaction is quote-unquote proportional to like your status and all is because people are reasonable. I like to posit that the stigmatization is the only exclusive method that makes people cognizant about different people's contexts. It is only through the stigma that makes people more aware of what is considered proportional love and all. And that's why their relationships are more meaningful. Because they don't recognize that to you, and that's why then all their responses simply don't work. Because they are unable to define the proportionality, then they say toxic individuals can manipulate. Notice how there was no response coming from DPM on Hannah's story. Because if we agree that if I have to be a good friend, or I was considered a good boyfriend is someone that gives a lot and I expect something from my girlfriend, that means I'm allowed to love bomb her like crazy, buy her as many flowers as I can in the first month, and expect a lot of favors from her, whether it be physical, whether it be emotional, whether it be even telling her to don't leave the house because I give you this much, you should actually listen to what I say. This is the exact narrative that incels use, by the way, which they are people that they are championing. I'll take you later. They say that we want to combat male loneliness, but these incels are championing this 50-50 thing, where they like to believe that this sort of version is where they can get some sort of happiness. Where the problem is that women are so superficial and they are unable to appreciate men for what they do. But I think that stigmatization is what that actually makes these men actually aware that what is considered proportional of how much limits on you can actually ask out of a woman. That's why that's really important. But the last part here, and I think most important response here, is that they assume also in PM that if you don't do this, or in a world in competition, you get more resentment, and it's quite difficult to opt out. I think Hannah is correct to call out that I think just because that that the moment at which you do feel tired, I don't think I think that feeling tired is one where you're already introspecting and asking yourself whether you want to keep maintaining this deep personal relationship, right? They assume that you just stay because because of all this history thing, but they don't map to you why transactionality is one that's going to be able to solve this, right? I wager to you that I think the problem here is that you look like you're too dependent on the validation of others. When I POI and I say, look, that the fact you can only get happiness better happiness on our side when it's innate, when it's internal sort of happiness from the act of giving. When I give my girlfriend flowers, when I give my mother gifts for Happy Mother's Day, when I try to coach towards people, I don't expect something back from my mom, my girlfriend, or my juniors. But then the reason why this is still better, because now under OG's world, I need to expect something in return, and I need to believe that this personal relationship that I invested so much in is one that's very susceptible. It's something that I should consider opting out of, because I'm not getting something back that is not visible there. I'll take you later. Let's go on towards the extension, right? Because I think the extension is simple. I think so long as we are able to answer why does the stigma even exist in the first place and what it has done on society, what it looks like, I think it's when it basically completes all the things that Hannah tell you. Where like a world where this stigmatization happen is one where the innate giving towards personal relationship is one that looks much more productive. I just want to first like make this clear in case before we go to the closing part, right? This debate is not about relationships in general. It's not between more friends. It's not between like your friends that you just met in debate. This debate is about personal relationships, meaning it's the friendship that you've met with your childhood friend. This looks like me and, I don't know, Amirul Shakir from Mara. This looks like maybe the sort of deep history that I have with my blood brothers in UTP. This looks like all these perhaps these deep familiar relationships within my families and my cousins, right? All this is important because I think these personal relationships is one that has a lot of history, and it has one that has a lot of deep understanding of context of where your life is, where you life are now, and you're more aware of how life changes. And I think most of us can agree, life does change for most people. I already am a different person than I was 10 years ago. But the transactionality model assumes that just because that I've changed, meaning the sort of amount that I'm supposed to give out to my personal relationship is still a lot more. They assume then for me to maintain my relationships is one that I have to keep talking to Amirul for over the next 5 to 10 years. But I think that's very bad because then that means I risk over-analyzing my life with him and I have to cut him out. But I think the model that I have in Sarah's first one is much more better because then when I realize that it's all about time that I spend with him rather than spend with me, so that we're much more appreciative, right? Before I go on towards the stigma, why stigma exists, I'll take it. Yeah. So that's all.
Yeah, so you talk about the fact that you already know these personal relationships, you know these individuals really well, then given that if they're really busy and you cannot interact with them, right, a lot, then you likely know that it is not their fault and you likely understand intricate nuances like we told you in most speakers.
So that's the cool thing here is that you don't need a world where transactionality is the norm for you to achieve that benefit. Then this is where my example comes in, because I think it's actually through stigmatization that you get these benefits. The reason why transactionality isn't the requirement here, or is one that actually makes it more difficult, is because they need to map to you what that transactionality looks like, or how people will portray transactionality in the media, by the way. This means they have to make movies about how the 50-50 looks like. The reason why I believe the 50-50 model is the most likely version is because they agree intuitively that people don't like being taken advantage of. So in a so far that if you agree that people need to get equal means 50-50 ma. So that obviously means that then the portrayal of media in terms of what great relationship look like is where it's clearly 50-50. The moment it's 52 or 50, like 1 out of 49, that's a bad person relationship. Go get out of the relationship. Last attention. Why does stigma even existing? I wager that this stigma exists from three folds. One, it looks like huge discourse and discussions in society that relationships are often meant to be organic and natural and not like hyper-analytical. This isn't your business partner, mind you. This is people that you grew up with and play football with. Second, I think Hannah is correct. In as so far as the matrix is about where you can get the most amount of happiness, it is damn draining to be over-calculative and to calculate how often you're trying to get something in return. Because if they agree that this is about feeling less draining, so that means likely in your world you get more drained and you get more burnt out because you at every point at which she gives you back something, you question whether it's enough to satiate your version of what a transactional relationship looks like. But last part, I think that this social media thing that Arjun tried to tell you is one that skews the definition of what 50-50 actually is like. I think the impact is simple. I think the bottom line is it's hard to control how people act. And I think that this stigma means that you're actually more cognizant of the context of where your friends are in different parts of different life. Only with stigmatization do you actually check yourself and ask, hey, am I being too harsh to asking too much more? Or am I actually giving too much? I think this is the only side that answers this, and I think this is the way that Pogo takes it.
Thank you so much, SIDEO. Moving on to the member of government.
I'll take a VOI from closing, data opening, preferably in 15 minutes onwards. CG's contribution will be fairly simple. We'll explain to you why necessarily the world in which we live in status quo is a world that oftentimes stops you from being able to be somewhat calculative. Or at the very least, the moment you try to bring up things, you oftentimes are seen as a person who is very utilitarian, you only care about certain parts of life, etc. And why necessarily you are shaped for those things. Two things I'll access here. The first thing to access is to talk about why there is a greater autonomy for individuals in a moment in time where you're able to act, like not be seen as bad, right? Because in status quo, the moment you start talking about, hey, I require or demand some things, the first thing is like, in Malay terms you'd say berkira, right? You always calculate things and you always want to compare between individuals and your contributions. CG is going to explain to you that this is actually good for multiple different reasons. The first thing you want to unlock to be unique from OG is to explain to you that it's the conversations that you have and the moment in time where you're able to have those conversations, where you're able to talk about multiple different things. What does this look like? The first thing we'll tell you, it's about setting boundaries in a relationship, for example. The ability for you to be transactional and not be seen like an asshole is when you're able to set boundaries for things that you otherwise wouldn't be okay with. For example, if in a relationship your partner isn't doing their duties as a husband or as a wife or whatever, the reality is there's an ability for you to condemn their actions, to be able to hold them accountable for not doing these certain things that you do. So for example, yes, if you do pay for your friend's meal and you expect them to a certain extent to be there for you when you're sad, it's something that's extremely valid. But secondly, we'll explain further as to why necessarily the pathway beyond that is not only about demanding now, but also how you leave those relationships afterward. Because it's about how you enter the mental calculus of most individuals, how our decision making is affected, and necessarily why this demonization stops us from the choice of self. The problem here is necessarily the moment in which you are transactional or a relationship is deemed as transactional is oftentimes deemed as selfish, that you are a selfish individual who chooses yourself over the other. The first burden that Op needed to deal with is to explain why this selfishness is one that's innately harmful. We argue to you that the real problem is when individuals aren't able to choose themselves, when they aren't able to unlock their own autonomy or leave relationships in which they feel wronged. The reality here, it's via this boundary setting, it's via these conversations that you have with your partner, where you're able to determine where necessarily are the lines you're not willing to cross, where necessarily you feel wronged and where necessarily you should leave from those things. But secondarily, this is a this house regrets debate. The counterfactual is coming from CG. The world in which we live in is probably a world where more likely than not that both sides of the individuals would probably see relationships primarily as to a certain extent transactional. So what this looks like is, if your spouse isn't able to provide you for the lifestyle that you demand or require, you're more likely to leave from the relationship noting that it's not fitting you. But this is good because you probably deserve someone who can fit that lifestyle that you want. But only the second layer also is towards the other individual in which you're engaged in a relationship with. the ability for them to find someone probably more fitting for their lifestyle without the rising hard feelings that oftentimes arise by virtue of how people think transactionality is a problem. So most times decisions are driven by sentiment like loyalty and love that oftentimes holds individuals back from leaving places or looking towards greener pastures outside of what they currently live. It is only within this narrative, it's only within CG where you're more likely to make those decisions, stand up for yourself and leave from those positions, find better things. But second thing, I think this necessarily delineates from OG, because what OG attempts to do is only deal with the positive. We will deal with the harms coming out from OO. The simple question of does this mean that people become less likely to be generous or altruistic? The answer is simple, that the concept of generosity and kindness will always be seen as a virtue. The reality of you helping other people or you trying to be selfless is something that people will always love. The reason why we look at, Mother Teresa and be like, wow, Mother Teresa, has always been because of how naturally that person is seen as one of a saint. That person who helps another without the expectations of demands. Will this suddenly fade out within society? The answer is probably no, for multiple reasons. One, that oftentimes when we engage in acts of altruism, it helps us as well. We feel good when we help our friend. So when Zul trains and he sees his kids becoming better, obviously he feels good. So maybe he doesn't need that money. But secondly, and this is just to be realistic and fair, that altruism has its capacities, its limits, and realistically, there is an end to it. There's an exhaustion that comes from altruism. To constantly help but not be appreciated. To constantly give but not get back. It's something that's demeaning and oftentimes very, very exhaustive. So maybe you're Zul and you can take it. The rest of us probably can't. So that's the reason as to why constantly, sometimes we deserve some sort of whatever the word. It's reciprocation, right? Okay. Therefore then, but the third extension then is the most important one, okay, is why absent of the stigma around transactionality, the entrenchment of gender norms will have lesser potency. This is important because the world in which we live in is a byproduct of how we see relationships as always having to be sacrificed. It is through transactionality that this largely changes and why gender norms shifts drastically. The caveat we'll make here is that gender norms, I'll take that, sorry. The caveat we'll take here is that gender norms would still be propagated by multiple different societal pressures, we agree. But why is this something that's, but necessarily it's via this transactionality that you create a strong counterfactual for women to challenge this belief. It is when you're able to predetermine the value in which you bring into a relationship that makes you much more valuable. These conversations are only unlocked when you're able to say, but then transactionality isn't a problem. When you're able to say, the emotional labors that I bring to this relationship is something that needs to be appreciated. The things that I do for this, that are hidden, that are oftentimes not financially seen, is something that's important. So men can't get away with saying, but I'm the breadwinner of the family and I bring the money back home, therefore you must respect me at all costs. It is when you argue that transactionality via the women and via the evaluation of the woman's actions within the relationship that you're able to consolidate your power and finally break gender norms and say there are things I demand from this relationship. If you're not up to date, you should go back.
Thank you to the member of GOV. Moving on to member of opposition.
I have two problems with side government. I think they don't really accurately identify where does the stigmatization happen and to what forms of relationship that actually suffer stigma in the first place. Because there's a huge problem under the other side, which is they assume that current status quo, the idea of transactionality is inherently non-existent and is having deep as bad. when in reality, we as from CEO thinks that that is completely untrue, and we want to reframe this debate by saying that the reality is often more different. That is the fact that in current status quo, transactionality is actually something that is far more encouraged, especially within relationships themselves. For example, you are expected if you enter a relationship for that person to love you back. That is a form of transactionality. And even if like being friends with somebody, close friends with somebody, is tend to be the reason why somebody lose their friendships, is when you know that your friend does not back you up whenever you back them up. Transactionality is not as rare as they're trying to say. Therefore, they have no clear standing on, especially since this debate is a regret debate, right? They have to give up a clear example where in status quo, a form of transactional relationship is actually being stigmatized by both society and the majority of people.
You're right.
But the reality is different, what I've mentioned. Therefore, I think the only place where this stigma can actually really exist are on relationships such as friends with benefits that are more often they are more often like exchanging or only viewing the other partner as common for their own bodily value in itself and not as a person. I think this is the most important thing in this debate, because on the other side, most of the stuff is already symmetrical here. Like for example, friendships and love, and even with your parents, there are a lot of expectations for you to reply their kindness in the same way. And furthermore, social norms itself encourage people to be kind of another. For example, if you want to make friends with each other, you have to return a kindness that people have. I don't think this stigma really exists when it comes to those instances, because a side government doesn't give a clear example of where those stigma exists. Now, here's unique contribution coming from SIDEO, is that what those stigma would actually look like on our side. I think the reason why we choose relationships that are the kinds of friends with benefits, because there's an active stigmatization coming from society due to religious values that condemn people for being friends just for lust or just for their own desires, right? Because most often than not, society itself propagates the idea of transactionality to some degree, even if it's not as apparent. But the most apparent example in status quo is in instances where these friends with benefits are being consistently punished by people entering into sexual relationships just for sex within themselves, are constantly stigmatized and punished by religious groups and a lot of conservative within society in of itself. Now then, I think as so far we provide a clear image of what actually is being stigmatized in status quo. I think therefore CEO give you a more clearer side on what to defend, because the other side have to defend the stigmatization that this side have to defend the absence of this stigmatization that actually happened within status quo. As so far as their example does not contain any stigmatization in the first place, I fail to see. Before I move into my arguments, yes.
The Infoslide motion says personal relationships. Do you define personal relationships as just friends with benefits, or is there a broader definition that you support?
I think friends with benefits are personal in a sense, because sex itself is something very personal to you. It also is also something that includes how you like somebody. These are things that are very personal to you, who you want to do sex with in the first place. Therefore, I think it's very clear. And if you try to argue on friendships on itself, I don't think this current stigma is there. Because I feel like the opposite is there. Because you are more expected to be kind to your friends if they are kind to you back. You're more expected to kind of be pay back your friends for the debt that you owe them. So far as I don't see why do people are afraid of being kind to their friends or want to return a gift to their friends. There's no incentive explaining that. I don't think the side government has anything to stand on. But okay, moving on to my argument. Number one, why are this particular form of transactional relationship deserve this stigmatization? Number one is that not only you only view each other as mere body as only commodities, it's the fact that you dehumanize each other. It's the fact that you only view each other as a place to release your lust. It's the fact that you no longer empathize with that person simply as a person with a lot of other personalities, other desires, and on. You only use them with for your own self-satisfaction. This is bad then for three reasons. Number one, because due to this, it encourages a lot of hookup culture, which is also harmful for your health and can encourage the spread of STDs. But I think number two, it also affects how you then view romantic relationships. I think this itself is a very harmful impact, because the only reason why in status quo why like people and like not many people enter into this relationship in the first place because it's heavily stigmatized by society. In the absence of this stigmatization, right, there's a high encouragement for people to actually join this like form of in transactional relationship. And I think this is particularly important then, because the moment in time where you distort your view of love and relationship, you only view like the potential the potential to like achieve love only because you are skewed because you only view people as the only place where you can release your desires. You don't have you doesn't have a healthy way to make and create commitment with other people. I think this is far more better on the outside because the flip side here is on the outside. The existence of this stigmatization stop people from entering into these kinds of relationships, especially since a lot of people actually shun people in status quo for entering this into transactional relationships that are sex-based in general. And I think furthermore, this is also beneficial. Like, it's not only we have a better relationship in the sense that you don't view your partner simply as a place to release lust. It's also the fact that people themselves can it's the fact that you stop like this dangerous like spread of like STDs in status quo. I think these are very material benefits that are actually unique on the outside. It's very like clear image because look, the like comparative in the rest of the case is that it's there give a very vague example on like you have to understand the other person when in reality the situations are different, how you understand your friends are different. Like they don't really give a clear incentive why people want to stigmatize being kind to your friends in the first place. Especially those are how relationships are formed in the first place. Therefore, we give a far more accurate framing of the debate. I think we should be credited for that.
I'm going to first deal with CEO's case about grooming basically, because their idea is what stigma looks like and saying is why friends with benefits is wrong because of multiple religious reasons and how sex is going to be something that's also seen as personal and transactional. Okay guys, if I sleep with you, you sleep with me, that's transactional, great job, we achieve everything. I don't know what the point of this is in debate. I think it's largely due to what all other three teams were saying. I think CEO is already going to get boxed up. But the one thing I want to respond to is the idea as to why you exactly need stigma. And the reasons for this is that they say you dehumanize each other and you no longer identify that person as a human being and why you only see them as a place to just release desires. But here's how Akasyah's material already engages with that and already takes this down. Because the conversations that lead up to transactionality is when you need the absolve stigma to actually make it work. And here's how you map out and how the conversations are actually going to go, what CG tells you, and why it's going to be better than OG in general. But only in CG, where you unlock how the absence of the stigma breaks the silence and affords more conversations. In Ops world, relationships become feeling like more of a moral obligation, and to challenge that via any form of conversation is going to be seen as one that's a lot harder. But responding then to the argument as to how to dehumanize this, because I think there needs to be a very, very clear separation as to what love is and what relationship is within the realm. Because I think it's very clear. Love is something that's blinding. You get stuck wearing rose-tinted glasses and you cannot accurately evaluate the relationship. What does this mean and why is this what's the comparative for both worlds? On Gov, you access your relationships. You chow if you need to, because you realize that this is toxic as shit and you don't want to stay in this anymore. And obviously, you still have love for this person. And obviously, you still care for this person, which is why people get stuck in toxic relationships a lot. The reason as to why the only ability for you to exit and have any form of opt-out only exists in CG is because these are things that are predetermined before you even enter the relationship in the first place. It is very, very clear and apparent as to what exactly was the purpose of your relationship. So even if you want to run the case of like friends with benefits and just fucking around whenever you want to, these are things that you can establish very early on under our world, where the point is that it becomes clear and it makes it very, very clear as to what exactly are the expectations that you receive from another person to your own, which makes it easier for you to be able to deal with things as to whether or not this person is reaching your expectations, whether or not this is something that you're willing to give more, because this is something that's already been established very early on. Why does this make it so much harder for you to be able to assess the relationship on off? Because you're clouding your judgment with pure love, because there's nothing that you can point to say that you are doing more than the other person. Because at any point you want to say, I paid for petrol, I bought you flowers, I also paid for the mama, it makes it very, very difficult for you to be able to say that these are all the things that I'm doing and all I'm receiving is you're holding the hands in my car. Like that is not enough, and that form of transactionality is the only ability for you to point out the flaws in your relationship. But more importantly, these are things that are done earlier on in the relationship,
which means it's a proactive approach. But number two, it also leads to things like less heartbreak, because you realize the things that you're stepping into. You realize the obligations that you're opting into when you enter a relationship in the first place. The stigmatization stops these forms of conversations from even happening. And this is where OG stops their analysis. But it's also about the process of learning as to how you want to love, how you want to give love, how you want to receive love. Arjun says there are 5 love languages. These are things that you don't immediately know when you get into a relationship. Not only do you not know that for yourself, but you also don't know that for your partner that you're trying to love and care for. Which is why transactionality requires forms of conversation, and why that conversation is something that's a prior to achieving any form of the benefits that happens under Gov. Why is transactionality needed then? 4 reasons for this. Number 1, there are societal coercions and stigmas that are already going to be placed on your gender norms. There's asymmetric premiums that are placed onto a husband and wife, and what their expectations and role are in a relationship. Which is why you need a conversation between these people in a relationship to begin with. The reason as to why this doesn't happen on the side of opposition is because any attempt to bring up the conversation is one that's extremely shut down very easily, because you're immediately seen as being transactional, and you're being seen as over-calculative as shit. But second is that it leads to more resentment, because you're malu and you're shy to be able to talk about this conversation, because you don't want to be seen as a weakling, and you don't want to be seen as the person that cannot provide for the relationship. You don't want to be seen as the person that's stopping this relationship from growing, which means that it leads to more resentment, because you can never have this conversation in the first place. All your feelings get bottled up. You can never have a conversation with a partner. Sure, you can talk to friends. Sure, you can talk to family, and you have support structures that will be able to tell you whether you're in a toxic relationship or not. But the ability for you to feel love for this person, but never be able to analyze whether or not the relationship is something that actually works, is something that can only happen when you don't have stigmatization of transactionality in the first place. Third is that there is better self-evaluation. And here's where we deal with OO as well. Because OO says you can do self-evaluation, and they kind of stop there. Like, yeah, self-evaluation is good, but who exactly does it better? Because it's difficult to be able to arrive at the same logical conclusions that you want to arrive at the end of the day. Because it's difficult to say that you were doing too much or you were not doing enough in a relationship. It's a lot easier when you have standards and you have boundaries as to whether or not you can respect them, and whether or not you can be able to achieve the expectation that your partner is placing on you. That form of self-evaluation can only be done on the side of CG when you have these conversations as to what exactly is the relationship going to entail in the first place. Which means that even if you do get heartbroken, and even if you do get dumped, the ability for you to self-evaluate that is a lot easier under closing government, because you understand the expectations and boundaries that were already placed onto the relationship in the first place. Fourth is that this is a proactive approach, which means conversations and defining expectations before the relationship starts. It makes boundaries extremely clear, things that you shouldn't cross, things that you shouldn't be able to decide as to whether or not it's something that's good or bad. If I continue, sure.
Government best doesn't map or prove that these convos will go well. Gender roles and asymmetry still exist. So I think this policy look more in charge is less draining when you trust your family and your girlfriend as is.
Okay, so gender norms exist for both genders, number 1. But number 2 is that these are things that are exactly the conversations that you need to have. Your society tells you that the guy needs to be the breadwinner. Society tells the women that you need to be the mother. And that's how you have asymmetric definitions as to what exactly you need to provide for the relationship. The ability for you to define something as transactional allows the husband and wife to be able to evaluate what exactly are you giving to the relationship. If you are the breadwinner, how much are you exactly providing? What do you expect in return? Do you want to come back to a clean house? Do you also, if you're the woman, similarly as well, right? Like if you are going to be a mother, it makes it very clear as to what exactly are you contributing to the relationship. Which means that if you want your husband to come home and not just sit with a beer in his hand watching TV, these are things that you can bring up because you feel that you aren't getting enough compared to what you're putting into the relationship in the first place. Last piece of weight then between opening half. OG talks about the toxicity and the ability for you to opt out and evaluate the relationship well. Like this is a great case, we thought about it in rap, but it isn't precise enough to be around. What are the exclusive impacts that closing government provides you? Besides the 4 that we already talked about earlier, is the idea of you just being able to predetermine those boundaries. Less likely for you to be able to experience heartbreak. Ability for you to be able to evaluate what that relationship meant to you, how much that person provided for you, whether or not this person was a good person, and whether or not you yourself was someone that was good in the first place. One, you aren't entitled to things like their time, and you overanalyze things like what exactly is the transaction. Like transactions don't need to be 100 You obviously evaluate what that transaction means and how much these things mean to you, which means exactly what OG says. I'm not sure, there's no point in repeating the response. I think this case already kind of dies off there. But the second is the idea of they will love bomb, and then they say you didn't give enough, and that's how incels use it. But the same thing also applies, right? If you're getting love bombed, you know exactly what this person is doing, and therefore aren't going to change anything from that. For all those reasons, propose.
End of the day, make sure everyone has a nice dinner and nap. Motoni on operate. Yeah, I'm following up with. I'm saying before we end up the day, following up with. I'm sorry, there was a miscommunication. I meant to say before we go and take a dinner and we have a land calling on up with.
Before I begin, is this audible?
Yeah.
Without further ado, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. OG's entire case is basically removing the stigmatization from transactional relationships will solve the problem of transactional relationships. If you are trapped in giving effort, promoting giving effort will solve it. That's basically the whole case. They don't want to concede on the fact that transactional relationships are the reason relationships don't feel real. It's why the idea that in the Netherlands, your friends will send you a payment request for 49 cents water. It's why it's so bizarre for us Malaysians. They bring a case that's under the assumption that everyone is an asshole. Please realize, even right now, I'll buy you a drink and we'll be okay with never seeing you again. Human compassion exists in the house. Going to CD. CD's entire case is contingent on the fact that non-transaction relationships do not have boundaries and that they're inherently bad. They agree that kindness has a limit and is good, but that it needs to be stopped before it goes over the limit. But the entire case falls when you realize, hey, if you're not happy in these relationships, you can leave. Advocating for transaction relationships won't solve the issue. I'll feel less likely to want a friend that asks for every last cent for the payment that they give me. Really go me a water and they keep asking for me. I feel less likely to continue to be friends with them. Relationships on their side are just a lot worse. What does OO bring? OO's entire case is basically just why personal relationships are supposed to be organic. And we agree with that. Our side targets the most vulnerable stakeholder, which is hookup culture, and this is a very real problem which I'll prove to you why. So, one and only clash in this debate today, which side actually provides better personal relationships? Let's start with OG. OG starts by saying one-sided relationships are bad, that people will take advantage of each other, under the pretense of being friends, that it's hard to opt out from these relationships because it's stigmatized to call it out loud. People aren't people pleasers. If I don't want to pay, I can reject that. Even in current school, even if people are people pleasers, they can opt out very easily by keeping distance, by ghosting, etc. It's just so easy to opt out in these scenarios. It's easy to opt out in current cola. Hey, if I cut Richard because he kept leeching off, it's like saying, hey, I cut off Richard because he kept leeching off me. Most people will say, cool, that's normal, right? That's really normal. Second argument going back to them by them is basically about how communication is better. About if I do more in the relationship, I receive more. Isn't this just a never-ending loop of expecting because you put in effort? You are not entitled to you're never entitled to someone's attention just because you put in effort. Unrequited love, right? That was the topic they brought up. Just because this girl I like or boy I like is not giving me attention doesn't mean that he's entitled to because I put in so much effort into it. It's very bad. This is kind of stalker vibes, This is the very reason transaction relationships are just bad inherently because they just become materialistic. They become basically, I give you this, so I get this back. That's not how it works. So what does their DPM tell you? Their DPM tells us that they will have better friends, that people will return the kindness they give to them, and that love will be reciprocated better on their second day. But they remove the stigmatization of the transaction relationship. The current status quo is people who are kind due to the stigma of being In the current status quo, people are kind due to the stigmatization of being transactional. Accepted, yes.
So your side, your whole value relies on people being self-sacrificial enough to be happy just by giving and working for others without any compensation. What's the difference between that and slave labor?
I have it somewhere here. I want to lose my time. So basically, right, in the current status quo, people on their side are kind only due to the fact that they stigmatize not to call these transactional relationships out, but also right, people are generally just kind and compassionate. They're kind enough to treat their friends to a meal without asking for a thing. They're kind enough to not be constantly asking their friend to pay, like sponsor the meals and that stuff. Because people are generally sane and they're generally kind. Like it's an uncharitable point out. Like it's symmetrical. People have better friends on both sides. Like yeah, that's all. And okay, moving on to what does OO say. So OO basically gives the case of how personal relationships look like giving full effort to each other, about how relationships are supposed to be organic and that a transactional relationship would be draining. We agree with that, and we extend upon that in extensions, and I'll prove that later. So what is CG? We'll go to CG, right? What does CG actually mean to the table? They argue about kindness having limits. They see that transactional relationships have more boundaries and how it's actually a better personal relationship for the person. Two responses. Firstly, kindness does have limits. So, but what's so wrong about that? With these people, what's so wrong about these people with limits leaving when they overstep their limit, right? Because if I have to force someone to reciprocate their love to me by removing the stigmatization of transactional relationships, then that person probably wasn't worth it in the first place. You know, because like if I have to force someone to love me, then like that's probably not even worth it later on. Secondly, on the topic of boundaries, right? The boundaries are on the topic of boundaries, the boundaries that they advocate for are basically don't invest too much into a relationship where you know that they can't reciprocate. So relationships on their side, this is like doing the bare minimum because you know that if you do too much, then they can't reciprocate that, then you have to cut them off. This basically is really bad. Like it looks like relationships are completely materialistic and completely contrasting, and that's what we're advocating against. So they argue that okay, so what does our side and SIDEO argue for? So we tell you that social norms already exist. Okay, exactly.
Yeah, you talked about like people like having good friends and people are inherently kind. But in the scenarios that people are inherently manipulative and bad, there's no mechanism for you guys to actually get out of the
okay, I already told you that it's so easy for these people to opt out into, even if in the worst case scenario that you're a people pleaser, right? It's so easy to just like cut these people off. You can distance yourself from them. You can ghost them. It's social media, man. Like if I was an asshole to you, you probably like never see me again because you probably be avoiding me or blocking me overall. Like it's just so easy. Like, I don't think a mechanism even in itself is kind of not really good in my opinion. So moving on, what does our side actually do to you? We tell you that social norms actually exist. So basically you are the most likely to be kind as it is the norm. So these toxic relationships that happen on their side are kind of non-existent or heavily mitigated. We actually give you good substantive matter to argue on. We tell you we talk about hookup culture as a whole. This is a very unique case. But let me explain why this is not unique. Why it's actually relevant to the case. I know it's a bit baffling for SIDEO to come up with a case like this, but transactional relations at its core is usually and more commonly about intimate sex. The stigmatization of these relationships are usually friends with benefits. It is much more stigmatized to be in a friends with benefits situation as opposed to whatever relationship as brought to by other lecturers. So this is why I argue that this case that we bring is actually really relevant to the case. We tell you that on our side, personal relays have a lot more. We actually argue to you on our side about personal relays. We actually argue to you on actual real and substantive harm and actual good benefits. A lot of the cases that are being brought to the other benches by the other benches are symmetrical, which is why I believe that we bring the clash and why we win this bingo.
Alright. Thank you everyone. That's all for today. Good job for surviving day one. All the best for day two. Approach me for feedback after the break if you want to know details as usual. Thank you.
Send my regards to the other send my regards to the other video, okay? And me and
Happy to, yes. You think I group yours, right?
Yeah, so send my regards to them.
Work for the extension already.
So I saw you last year.
SIDEO?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. I was a meeting.
But I saw you also.
Yeah, I was telling you.
Oh my god, all this like, it's already been
literally as I'm writing my session, okay, Arjun is not saying this, the Arjun goes, should we go talk about this? I'm like, oh my god. I should say, I should say,